run. I'm Nicole Linden. I'm the RA of Belcourt Hall. This is my gender-free event for March. I understand it's April. It's April Fool's. We get it. It happens. Here's your cookies.
Oh, you're a champion. Thank you.
Wonderful. I use she, her pronouns. I also work at the Women's and Gender Center. Those are my folks in the back and in the front. Actually, they're everywhere. I love them very much. And so I wanted to do a non-binary in the workforce panel, just because we don't have a lot of non-binary spaces on campus. Most of the time, they're lumped into women's spaces. That doesn't make any sense. Non-binary does not mean feminine. That's just not how it is. Period, retweet, whatever you'd like. So I decided that this was going to be my passion project for my senior year, because obviously I wasn't busy enough. Here we are. It's been 2 months. I'm stressed out, but I have these lovely people next to me, and I'd love for you to introduce yourselves. Rock, paper, scissors. It should be on.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay, cool. Hi everyone, my name is Nell Carpenter. What should I say?
Where do you work?
Cool. My pronouns are she and they. I work at Vermont Works for Women, so snaps to non-binary spaces, not to feminine spaces. Yeah, I'm the education program coordinator.
Sounds great.
I'm Holly Painter. I teach in the English department at UVM, and I use she or they, or really anything. I'm good with anything.
Hey everyone, my name is David. My pronouns are they, them, and I work at UVM as a service officer.
Sounds great. Okay. Well, thank you for coming. As you notice, we have a fourth chair. We were going to have an extra panelist. They couldn't make it at this time, but we keep them in our thoughts, I guess. I'm sending positive thoughts into the universe for everyone. My first question is, I really just want you to share a story about how your gender identity kind of has some conflicts in your workforce, how you got around it. If it's a positive story, that sounds cool, but I understand that there's a lot of negative ones out there. Negative ones. That was a weird way to say that. Yeah. Who wants to start?
Got something like?
Yes.
All right. So this is just want to get us started. So I work in the English department, and we share a hallway with the economics department. And there's a professor on my hallway who's nearing retirement. You know, kind of all around, wants to be a nice guy. I think he's a nice guy in many ways, and really wanted to give me a nickname, because we're buddies. Yeah. So he kept calling me. He called me like Miss Holly, and I was like no. And he tried like Miss Painter, and I was like no. And he's like, oh, Mrs. Painter, you're married. And I was like no. So I sort of explained to him that this was not really. He could just say Holly. Holly really works. Everyone else called me Holly, and didn't really need a nickname. But he insisted, you know, that he had to have something, and so I said he could call me Captain Holly. And so now he does. So this man who greets me every morning with, hello, Captain.
Oh my gosh.
So that's my opening here.
I love that. Okay. I'm going to start going by Colonel. Please and thank you. It will now be on my degree.
Hi, Colonel.
Yeah. Gotta start off strong.
Here you go.
So it's kind of ongoing. I haven't been at Vermont Works for Women for that long, but there's a lot of pride in the work that's done for women, and a lot of pride in what a lot of people think is an all-female office. And so I've kind of been in this period of navigating, kind of being okay with every day. It's like, morning ladies, or the ladies of Vermont Works for Women, or what have you, or kind of coming out over and over again to various people in the office. So that's one way, and it's ongoing, and there have been some great moments around it with conversations with coworkers, but an ongoing thing.
I have a not happy but not terrible story. I think most of my experiences navigating non-binary identity in the workplace have been pretty not good. I think I guess as the panel goes along and as folks get to know me, it becomes very apparent that this identity is one of the main conflicts in my work. More so than race, shockingly. More so than disability, more so than socioeconomic status. My gender has always been like the thing. Most recently at work, I work for police services at UVM, and I know that carries with it some tension. And I'm the only non-binary person who works there. I'm not the only trans person. And the other trans person is actually the reason why I applied for this job, because she is like one of my biggest supporters at work. And so my supervisor is this, your story actually resonated with me. He's this older guy who, I don't think he's close to retirement, but he's also not in the development stage of his career. He feels like he has things figured out, and he's a sergeant, and he's sort of stagnant at this point. But he shocked me during my last meeting with him, and he asked me about pronouns, and he initiated the conversation about my pronouns, because I never came out to the office in a direct way. I put my pronouns in my email signature, and I indirectly just sent everyone an email and just like, bolded the pronoun part, and I was like, and so he initiated the conversation and said, I'm an old guy and I don't really understand this, but have I been using your pronouns correctly? And I said no. and he was like, okay, thank you for being honest. And I said, yeah, thank you for starting the conversation. And then he said the cutest thing. He was like, so what about like first and second person pronouns? Like what, like do I say they every single time? Like, can I say you anymore? And I was like, I give you permission to use you. But then in all seriousness, I said, that's a good question. No, it's mostly third person references if you're speaking about me. And the easiest thing to do is just to not use pronouns, just use my name. And he was like, thank you so much for that advice. And I felt like that conversation it wasn't amazing because I had to expend energy advocating for myself, which is like something I have to do all the time. But it was like one of the better experiences I've had working in a place and talking about gender.
Yeah, it does take so much energy to constantly advocate for yourself. Let's talk about that. There are tons of stereotypes about gender. Thanks, Amina. Amina's the baby in the back. And really about being non-binary or gender non-conforming. Non-cis is also a term that we could use in this. How do we break down those misconceptions? Or like what are the biggest ones that are hitting you right now? That'd be great.
I have one. So the biggest misconception that I faced around non-binary identity is that non-binary always looks a certain way. I think I present very masculine and I wear clothes that are like societally considered masculine, and I have a masculine sounding voice. I think people are confused when I come out to them. People don't believe me. And I have faced some horizontal discrimination within the trans community for the way that I appear. And I'll give you a specific example. I was talking to a trans person, a trans man. He identifies with he, him pronouns, and we were talking about like the trans experience, and I was like, yeah, I identify as trans too. And he was very confused by that because not everyone who identifies as non-binary identifies as trans, and not everyone who identifies as trans identifies as non-binary, obviously, but I identify as both. And he was just really, really shocked and confused and didn't believe that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm non-binary, therefore I am not cis, therefore I am trans. And I had to like explain myself to another trans person. I think the way that I appear, again, is really confusing for folks. And there are there are femme aspects of my identity. You know, the way I talk and the way that I perform, you know, when doing music and acting and all of these other things. And so I don't want to necessarily say that I am more masculine or more feminine. It's just, I think people make assumptions about me when they find out I'm non-binary, and when they find out that I also identify as trans. So, yeah.
If I could kind of go in a different direction, before I worked at UVM, I worked a creative writing nonprofit for kids in Southeast Michigan, and I actually love talking to kids about gender. I have a 3.5-year-old, and we're just teaching him to ask people for their pronouns, because he doesn't know. He's not. We haven't made a big deal about gender, so he doesn't know. He makes a lot of assumptions. We're like, you can ask people. Don't go up to them and say, are you a boy or a girl? Ask them, what pronouns do you use? So he does that now. But most kids don't have me as their parent. So when I worked with kids for several years, we did all this creative writing stuff, and everybody was in this really like jokey mood. They were on a field trip at this creative writing center, and kids would constantly ask me, and they've been asking me, you know, since I was a kid, are you a boy or a girl, and all this stuff. And that scenario where I think that the emotional labor involved in sort of dispelling stereotypes and giving them information that they didn't already have is worth it to me, because I feel like I'm actually accomplishing something. With a lot of adults, I don't necessarily feel that way. Sounds like David had a really good experience with your supervisor where like you felt like something happened, but often I feel like it's just like in one ear out the other. But little kids, like, you have such an opportunity to like intervene in their life, and I haven't had anybody say these things to them. But the difficulty that I had was knowing how much of that I could do. The people that I work with were sort of like, you know, whatever. If they ask you a direct question, give them an honest answer. But they're also parents on these field trips who are supervising these kids, and I'm over there having a little chat with them about like the gender of binary. No, it's not. Let's talk about spectrums. Let's talk about like, nebula. And the parents are just like, And so there's a lot of that kind of feeling of like, I am inappropriate, and that, you know, that's bullshit. I'm not inappropriate. I'm a human, and a child asked me. So I think that's something that I really struggle with, knowing, you know, how much explaining I could do to that young audience that's so thirsty for it, without irritating or, you know, really causing damage to the organization that I was working with.
That's interesting because I work with kids, and so I should be careful. But two things come to mind. One is, which has already been brought up, which is the assumption that women-centered spaces are also safe, inherently safe and comfortable and whatnot for trans and non-binary people, which they're not. And that's not to say that kind of we can't make spaces that are for women and trans and non-binary folks, but that if we're not intentionally doing that, that it's probably not also a safe space for trans and non-binary people, and that whether like the cis women in a space think that or not, that just kind of is true. The other one is that kind of ties into what David was saying about assumptions with identities. I think a big misconception is that your pronouns indicate your gender identity, which is something that I think comes up a lot and is a lot of confusion, and is a lot of the times when my coworkers are like, wait, what? Can you, like, I don't get it. Can you explain it? And that I think that's how a lot of people they make that assumption, and they jump to those conclusions, and when they see people's pronouns, they assume this or that, and so then they assume that they can act a certain way or that they don't have to act a certain way, when the two are not tied, and both are both can be fluid. And so I think that that's another big one, I think, when it comes to me personally, where people, same thing, pronouns on email signatures. I've indicated plenty of times that I don't identify as a woman, and still people just kind of probably grasping onto the fact that I allow them to use she pronouns with me, and then just still kind of taking that as an invitation to call me a lady or a woman, or one of the ladies or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I for the most part do use she, her. I don't know. I feel like I just it's not the thing that's most important to me. So I'm sort of like she, her, whatever, and I don't feel sad about that. I'm sort of like, yeah, this is fine. Language is fluid and complicated, and this is working. But it does mean that I feel really invisibilized within the community, and amongst my coworkers. I think half of them don't know that I'm non-binary. They didn't ask, and I don't have an email signature that gives them a little hint. Yeah, so I'm interested to think more about how it is that we can, even when we sort of in classrooms at UVM, I know we all go around just the first day of class and say our pronouns, and I feel like sometimes we're just like checking the box, like, okay, we've done that, we are good, progressive, whatever, and that doesn't actually cover anybody's full situation. We just, figured out the functional language for running a classroom, which is not the same thing.
I guess I'll also add, I always tell people that I'd rather you know who I am than my pronouns. I would love it if people would correctly use pronouns all the time, and that would be amazing. But if somebody knows me and feels me and vibes with me, I am less likely to be offended if they misgender me accidentally. Because there's a certain intimacy that comes with knowing who someone is, that I can sort of use and navigate through that conversation. Hey, you just misgendered me, and it not being a big deal, or a what am I trying to say? A relationship crusher. Just like, I'm not mad at you. We're having this conversation because we know each other so well. So I guess what you said and what both of you said actually just really reminded me of that. I would much rather know. I would much rather know that people know me than know my pronouns.
Do you notice that you're more hidden in your professional spheres? Do you dress a certain, maybe different way, changing your voice? Yeah, I see a lot of nods from you, David. Yeah, you want to speak about that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, so I am super masculine at work. And the reason isn't safety per se, it's that I want to not have to have these conversations sometimes. And so when I'm driving around and I'm doing a patrol or whatever, and I'm with the 4 people in my unit it's me, and then it's 3 older white guys who are in their between 50s and 60s. And my job is a civilian job. None of us carry a weapon, and none of us are like police. And so the 3 of them, they're not like hyper masculine or toxically masculine. They're just like, they know that, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, they're not necessarily open to having these conversations. And so I exude a certain amount of confidence and masculinity when I'm working with them, to sort of avoid having to have that discussion. And then when I'm in social circles, like or in spaces like this, I'm less likely to do that, and I'm more likely to smile and laugh and be my authentic self, because having the conversation doesn't feel so daunting to me.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned being invisible and then how you dress. I think that's a big way in my office that I try and kind of feel visible or like assert myself or make people kind of think twice about my gender. But it's the kind of thing too where it intersects with other parts of me. So it's also like I'm short and look young, and so if I'm wearing like not heels, because I would not wear heels, but like there are certain outfits that I'll wear to try and make myself look older, and sometimes that's also kind of contradictory to presenting in a way that I want to, or wearing something that I totally feel good in. So that might be like wearing clogs and like a blouse because I'll feel older when I'm doing that, but not actually what I feel entirely comfortable wearing, or what makes me feel visible or seen as a non-binary person. So definitely, I think there's a level of kind of presentation. I remember when I was interviewing for this job, and my friend Alana can attest to this, and I was picking out my outfits, and I was like, okay, well, I need to look like professional, and I need them to like me, but also I want them to kind of recognize that there's nuance to my identity, but I don't want to have to come out, so maybe if I just wear something, it's a little bit like Mask of Censure, they'll get that, but probably they won't. And so just kind of like playing that game every morning, being like, how can I like queer it up a little bit? Like, can I put like a pin on, or like wear like a pronoun stain, or like whatever it might be, but just something to make them like, oh yeah, I wouldn't wear that. So I think definitely for me, visibility and how I present is tied, because it often does prevent having to like come out, like kind of like David, what you're speaking to, because like people tie expression and identity together pretty intensely. So.
So I had a previous job where I taught writing at a business school in Detroit, and I remember the dress code was, I think they were trying not to make a separate male and female dress code, so instead they said you could wear a nice blouse or shirt and a skirt, or you could wear pants, but you had to wear a jacket and tie with your shirt. And I had wanted to wear the nice pants and the nice shirt. I thought, like I've got half of each. That was not acceptable. So I had to decide, which one of these am I going to do? And at the time I was 24. I didn't have any money, and I went to Kohl's and bought myself a bar mitzvah suit, because that was what fit me. And I did look like I was the 13-year-old. And that's what I wore to this business school. And I feel like and the students were all, it was like a night school, and it was the no worker left behind era, so it was a lot of laid off auto workers who were going back and retraining in IT, and I was this basically 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy who showed up to teach a class, and it did not fill me with the kind of professionalism that I think they were going for with this dress code, and just made me feel stupid. Because, I wore a suit for my wedding, I felt good in that, but I didn't really it didn't make me feel comfortable with this crowd, but every class period for 15 weeks there I was in my suit, feeling like a dumbass. But now UVM has never presented me with a dress code. A lot of my coworkers, wear jeans and a t-shirt to work. So I usually dress like this and actually feel very comfortable now that I don't have to do the whole wedding suit thing.
Something I do want to touch on is self-care, because that is something, especially in the upcoming generation, they see it as a priority, which I firmly believe it is. I recognize myself as Gen Z, which means I am the self-care generation, and I will do a face mask every night if I have money for it. I don't, but that is my goal. I'm going to graduate, get enough money to do a face mask every single night. You can hold me to it. But I do want to know what you do to help yourself at the end of the day, at the end of the week, to deal with if you were misgendered or if you just felt different that day, how to stop that alienation.
I think seeking validating spaces and things.
Hello, thank you for joining.
My apologies.
No, you're okay.
I'll just talk to my mouth. Finding validating spaces if work isn't that. So for me, that's finding like queer spaces, trans spaces, even like media, like TV shows, news outlets, autostraddle.com, different things like that. That can kind of be the validating force at the end of an invalidating day or week or month. And that can kind of just like really charge you up. It can be a place to vent. And it just, again, validation can be really, really important in that, whether you realize it or not, can kind of just like become very, very heavy being misgendered. Even if it kind of doesn't land in heavy ways each time over and over again, can kind of just drain your batteries, and then finding a way to recharge that, I think, has been really huge for me, and just finding a balance in what I'm doing, like going to like queer comedy shows or things like that where you're just like steeped heavily in it. And yeah, therapy too, that's pretty big. So
Therapy's nice.
yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Introduce myself. Hi. My name is Lola House, and I sincerely apologize for being late. I underwent a crisis of sorts last Thursday, which involved a drop everything and go to New York City crisis. So I'm here, I'm trying to right my own ship. I was a UVM, do you want to
Yeah, do a bio.
kind of do a thing? I was a UVM employee for a long time and an adjunct professor as well as an IT support person there. And at that point, it was prior to my actual gender transition, although I was moving well into that. On the campus, I think you probably have had the same experience here of having a campus climate survey or something similar to it. And looking back, I can't say that the results of those campus climate surveys resulted in the kind of change I would have liked to have seen. I'm not sure that it has changed significantly. As I was moving into my gender transition, I was moving out of UVM. So I was fortunate not to have experiences there that left me feeling terrible about who I was. But my subsequent experience outside the university has left me feeling pretty terrible and pretty baffled about what to do about it. My live and in-person encounters with other people have very fortunately never been marred by anything violent. So I've been very lucky and I think very privileged in that respect. Where I find a great deal of difficulty with regard to how I intersect with the workforce is around how I am treated when I am in the presence or in the conversational radar of people who are in the workforce. And the problem, the challenge that I really feel called to and don't have a solution to
That's me. I'm sorry.
is how to call people out or call people in, depending on the case may be, when they do make a mistake, when they have all the information they need, but they don't see me in person. So if I might, I'd like to give just a couple of examples. I've had a couple of really good ones and a couple of really difficult ones. One of the really good ones, strangely enough, was in applying for a credit card, which has still not happened. And on the third or fourth call, because I knew that my gender identity would be an issue when I did the application, they do a credit check and all of a sudden it shows up with this big red flag. Wait, who is this person? Are they a terrorist? Are they some sort of domestic problem? So they sent me a letter and I called the security and I talked to somebody and then I sent the changes of documents that they needed, and one of them apparently wasn't good enough, but nobody said anything. So about 3 weeks later, I called back and I got a wonderfully nice woman who had all my information, my full name, and I don't know if they have things like gender markers in those applications. And without missing a beat, when she figured out my name, she said, "Oh, what is your preferred honorific? Miss, Ms., or Mrs.?" And it's the kind of thing that kind of makes my day, because somebody was paying attention, somebody ignored the voice marker, which is the big one on the phone, which is a real struggle to overcome, and made me feel just a whole lot better, like I really fit into the situation. The really bad one was actually when I went to rent a log splitter to split some wood last fall. I went out to a place in Essex Junction. I had given them all my information, full name, the whole bit. I walked in dressed similarly to how you saw me walk in here, although not wearing nice clothes. And the individual behind the counter, the lumberjack type, pulled up my record and looked me straight in the eye and said, "How can I help you today, sir?" And I never really know whether I should smack them, spit on them. You've got all the information there, and yet you completely ignore what you're seeing in front of you. And I don't know, I don't have an answer for that. I think that's partly a matter of the reality that the binary system that we are stuck in is so embedded culturally that we don't often have a choice about how other people see us and respond to us. But I'm still looking for ways to figure out how to approach people like that. I assess people on their intent. If their intention is malicious, they'll get slapped. If their intention is incidental or accidental because they're culturally practiced, I want to find a way that I can put words and appearances in front of them to get them to think about who they are in relation to me. I don't want to confront them with, well, screw you on the horse you rode in on, bud. I don't like sports, and I wear skirts, and I'm not going to fuck you, and I've got boobies, and I don't want to do the confrontation route because it doesn't help people understand themselves. And I think that's a big part of it, is that they need to learn to understand themselves before they can understand me.
That was wonderful. I'm just taking it in a little bit. But yeah, let's continue. Let's continue about self-care. Does anyone else have what they do?
I have kind of the opposite of them, which is I think you said something about being really steeped in the community and queer comedy shows and all that kind of thing. Sometimes I find our community exhausting, and sometimes I go read a book. And I've been doing a lot less social media, and that's been making me feel a lot happier. So, reading?
Yeah.
I heal from gender-based violence by steeping myself in POC culture. Which is interesting. So like, if I'm having a really bad day and I've been misgendered a lot of times, or like I've had an experience, I'll go home and I'll watch like Trevor Noah or Hassan Minaj or somebody on Netflix or online that's just gonna make me laugh. But that's also gonna be like incredibly social justice oriented and like affirm the ways that I'm feeling while not identifying the same way as me. And that's not to say I don't listen or follow, trans and non-binary poets and musicians and speakers. I do. It's just sometimes when I'm so in my trauma related to gender, I find refuge in my other identities. So I don't have to necessarily think just about gender. And I talked about this a couple of days ago. But intersectionality is super important to me, and some of the ways that I heal from gender-based violence is recognizing that's not the only part of me. Somebody has hurt one part of me, but they haven't hurt me as a whole. So yeah, that's my go-to, really.
How do you do self-care, Lola?
How do I deal with gender-based violence?
Yeah. How do you take care of yourself?
I think it's important to remember that we are in this country living at a time when anger and fear and conflict have become a political tool. And I say this because a couple of weeks ago I was struggling with a personal issue and anger showed up in a way that surprised me. And I talked to someone that I deeply trust, and she made this observation, along with a couple of other things that are not relevant to this. And I have made a conscious decision in the last couple of months to not willingly engage in uncivil discourse. So when I get a sense that somebody is pushing me in a direction I don't want to go around gender violence, I will do one or two things. I will either disengage and walk away because I can't see that there's productivity there, or I will make a very conscious decision to be more out than I am. and to be as visible as I possibly can be. And I'm willing at this point in my life to take the chance that that is going to not result in my untimely demise or an excessive hospital stay. I think it's different for everybody, and I've just heard 3 really different responses, which I think are all great responses. But I think that, well, I'm an anthropologist, and I did my master's, my graduate degree here in Vermont when civil unions was raging across the landscape. And I learned at that time that people's fear is often what consumes them in a way that makes them lash out and push back against me. And I also learned that fighting back in that way, I had to learn to pick my battles really carefully. And I don't have the time or the energy to try and combat violence with combat. So I'm going to combat it by being nice, and I'm going to combat it by being even more visible, and I'm going to combat it by being slutty and exhibitionist and very direct with who I am, because I want other people to know that I'm out there. I think one of the things that changed Vermont and changed and eventually helped lead to same-sex marriage was that more and more people began to realize that they knew or were aware of other people in their life that were that way. We're, as non-binary individuals, we're even more that way than they were in a lot of ways. And I think that the more the ordinary, cisgendered, heterosexual old white guys see us, and the more visible we are, the better. But my caveat is that isn't for everybody. I think that a lot of you are in a generation that is, I hope, blessed with the opportunity to have an increasing number of people who either just don't give a shit or they're fine with whoever you want to be. But I'll tell you, there's still an awful lot of assholes out there, sorry. It is.
It's true, unfortunately. Thinking about what we can do for a lovely audience here, how about a piece of practical advice that you can give to somebody who is either just starting to explore their gender identity or is maybe moving on the path? Something that maybe could have helped you at the beginning that you want to help others with?
I have something. I have 2 things. My first is advice for folks who are exploring their gender identity. My second is advice for everyone else. My first piece of advice stems from when I was first coming out as trans. I switched my pronouns from he, him to he, him, and they, them. I went through a middle period where I was okay with either, and but it's not because I was truly okay with either, it's because I felt like I had to do that. And so my piece of advice for folks who are exploring non-binary identity or just gender variance in general is try not to feel pressure to have that period where you allow friends and family and coworkers to misgender you and do things that you're not okay with just because you want the transition to be easier for them. I think that's such a common experience I've found in my trans community and my friends, folks feeling like, oh, my transition was so hard on my partner or my family or my friends. How could I have made it easier? Who gives a shit? Like, my transition is about me, and everyone else needs to get on board or get the fuck out. And so that's my first piece of advice for folks who are identifying. My piece of advice for everyone else is to constantly check in on your non-binary and trans friends, not because you have to, but because you want to, and because you want to know how their experience is going. And an example of this is don't assume someone's pronouns just because you've known them for a year or 2 years or 3 years. You need to constantly be updating yourself because fluidity in gender also means that one person who you've known for 5 years can have identified 10 different ways during your relationship with them. So really just updating yourself, being an ally, and I use that term very loosely, but being somebody who they can go to, who they feel comfortable with, and again, just keeping yourself apprised of what the actual deal is and what the situation is looking like, and not just assuming, oh, my person has come out to me, that's how it's going to be from now on, because that's actually not the way that transitioning works most of the time.
I would say something that was really important, or that is still really important for me, that might not be the same for everyone, but I know it's important for me, is just finding your community. It can be one of many for you, and it also can just be like 1 or 2 people. It can also be an online community. Any kind of community that helps you explore and feel safe and validated, I think, is wicked important, because there's a lot also that and still that I feel like I don't even have the words for, and I definitely didn't have the words for, or the face for, or the affirming words for, like any of that, and that just came from other people, or movies, or just kind of anything like that, but just kind of like having a group or a person, or just kind of someone else there, because it's really hard to do alone, and it really makes a difference to have people to turn to, I guess.
I recently sat down and had dinner with Kate Bornstein, whom I've known for a long time, who was the person who whispered in my ear, do it, you'll feel 10 years younger. And she was right, except I feel 30 years younger. And she has always fascinated me with her thinking. And her most recent iteration, and I want to make sure that this is fully credited to her, this is not my idea, is her observation that gender is 4-dimensional. There is the bodily dimension of height, width, depth. There is the cultural dimension. And those things are probably obvious to pretty much everybody who's in this room, but just by glancing around. But the 4th dimension was not obvious to me, and now I understand it, and now it makes perfect sense. It's time. So my advice is, don't take anybody's definition of how you are supposed to be who you are, because each one of us is going to have our own individual personal experience, and that's ours, and it's fine. Don't let anybody define it for you, straight or otherwise. Define it yourself, and know that it's probably going to be different in a month, or a year, or 2 years. And that's fine too.
So my answer also pertains to Kate Bornstein. So I'm from the Midwest, and I have parents who kind of understand what I've told them. But I guess my piece of advice would be that you don't have to explain everything and reinvent the wheel. Give them books. Like, there are books. Kate Bornstein's written some nice books. Gender Outlaw, my mother got most of that. Like, that was parent friendly. If you have younger siblings, there are books for children about this stuff too. So let them read it, let them process it, let them come back to you in a month when they've done their homework. You don't have to explain everything to them, and it doesn't have to be your job, because people have written books about this stuff.
I'd also like to know how you found your community. If it's a local Burlington community or maybe back home, just the steps that you took to find folks that made you feel safe and comfortable.
So I don't, I lived in New Zealand for about 7 years, and in New Zealand I did have a community, and then I moved to Singapore, where Singapore is not a place where you get to have a queer community because it's illegal. And so I knew, a few people here and there, but it was all very kind of, hush hush, for really good reason. And then I moved here a few years ago, and have had a lot of other communities that haven't really centered so much on queerness or on being non-binary. Being a parent means that unfortunately a lot of things are now like about my small child and like going to his gymnastics class and like sitting there feeling awkward because like all the moms are there and they know each other and I'm kind of like, hi guys, I'm here. Yep, that's he's not doing gymnastics, he's running around, yeah. So I don't really feel like I've found a community here that supports me in that way, but I have found, in general, I found people to be a lot more welcoming, perhaps because I came from Singapore and my standards are quite low. But a lot of people I've met have been really good about sort of asking me what are my pronouns, or can you tell me more about how you identify or how you experience your gender. So it's been a really weird transition to now kind of like belong to this mostly straight parent world. But I feel like I'm doing a lot of really good education work with people and finding them to be more receptive than I expected. So I don't know if that's time or place or just good luck, but that's been really nice.
I think how I find my community goes back to what I said before about intersectionality. I find myself most comfortable in spaces where folks are identifying and acknowledging multiple parts of their identity. So in queer people of color spaces, for example, or trans people of color spaces, I really flourish and I thrive because the conversation doesn't just go one direction, it can go multiple directions. Ironically though, some of my best friends, we never talk about gender. And I'm okay with it, really, because I know that, as I said before, they know who I am, and we don't need to talk about pronouns, and we don't need to talk about the way I'm dressing or speaking or existing. We're just like hanging out and having fun and talking. One of my closest friends lives in the UK. I haven't seen her for a year and a half or something, and we haven't talked about gender since I last saw her in person, and I'm okay with it. I think spaces where I don't have to explain myself, and people who I don't have to explain myself to, are where I find my community. Yeah, I'm just so thankful for intersectional spaces, because I said this a couple days ago too to some of you, but there are not a lot of folks who identify the way that I do in my community, and that being non-binary, Asian, with a disability. And so I can't limit myself to just find a community with those people because they're not in abundance. And if I limited myself to that, I would be constantly disappointed. I would be setting myself up for failure in terms of connection and community building. And so I have to really branch out and think to myself, what aspects of those, what do I really appreciate about that? And that is the intersectionality piece. So I can connect with people who maybe don't identify the way that I do, but understand that it's integral to who I am.
Kind of echoing what David said, I think a lot of the communities that I feel a part of are not necessarily queer or trans, but just kind of validating and safe. and also to kind of go back to something that you said, Holly, I think that queer and trans spaces, especially ones in places like Burlington, can be really exhausting and overwhelming. And even, like maybe a tinge invalidating or freaky sometimes. So I think it just, I don't know, I think I've had a lot of just like friends of friends, like you should meet this person, or you should know that person, or you come over because this person's also going to be over, or go live with my friends, or things like that, that I think have worked out well and have kind of built up. But again, just to make space to recognize that some of those, like, you should want to come to this affinity space or this affinity event, like sometimes those can not be the greatest, but I think bits and pieces of that can be great to build community and even just kind of exist in that space, not even necessarily to take everyone in and be best friends with everyone. So, yeah.
How did I find my community? I literally stumbled into it. I would probably say maybe it found me. I identify as polyamorous, as kinky, as queer, lots of other things. And quite a long time ago, when I was at a point in my life where I knew something was happening to me, I had a kind of literally a do or die decision around what I was going to do about some of this stuff. And I wound up going to a very large national event, being completely, totally clueless. You have never seen anybody more clueless than me walking into this event, and I was gifted with meeting people. I didn't know who they were. It turns out they were some pretty well-known people that I found out a year or so later was, ooh, that's who that is? I wasn't connected to any of this. But all of this was down in the Baltimore, D.C. area. But I did meet people like Barbara Carrillis, Kate Bornstein's partner, and that network has little bits and pieces of threads up here. But I don't really, at this point, have a community of trans persons or non-binary persons or queer people up here. One of you pointed out, this is a pretty small community. It can be a little bit intense, and that's true. So I'm a little bit cautious about that. But one thing I do have is I have a wonderful community of sorts through both of my current partners. And they are very, very different people. And one of those partners was in a lesbian relationship for a long time. And I have been very privileged to be included in part of that. It hasn't been without its bumps, but for the most part, I would say I felt very welcomed by that group of people, which has been a very wonderful surprise for me. It's really difficult to find places. I don't really like the term safe space, although I understand it. It's really difficult to find places that I feel like I can go in and just swim in and enjoy. There used to be gay bars and queer bars, and they've all pretty much gone away. And I'd like to see them come back, because I think that, although I'm not wild about the idea of separation of spaces, I think integration and some presence and maybe a little bit of in your face is a good thing for the rest of us, for the rest of those people that are out there, what I call the civilians. I think that it's really helpful to have spaces where any one of us can walk in and feel like, oh, this feels really good.
Okay, I do have a question. I'm cis, and I want to know what I can help my trans, my non-binary, my genderqueer friends at work, how I can be supportive of them, how I can change the space from the inside out, basically, like from within. You could give me 1 or 2 tips of how you want me to dismantle the system, get it on. I won't write them down, but I'm recording this, so I will listen to it back. Yes, hello to our, it's not a live audience, but it would have been nice.
I think the easiest and most accessible way for anyone to help is to intervene so that we don't have to. If somebody misgenders me, and you're with me and you're my friend, you best be saying something. You best be correcting them, and you best be starting that conversation, because it's not always my job to do that. Another thing is giving and allowing space for trans and non-binary people in meetings. So sometimes in meetings, always in meetings, you'll find that there are certain people who always are talking, and sometimes it's just because that person just likes to talk, but most of the time it's identity-based. It's a white person, or it's a man, it's the only straight person in the room, you know, it's identity-based in some form, and so something that a cis person can do is give that space to me, to us, because again, it's not always our job to ask for it, but we're not going to get it unless somebody asks. The third thing I'll say, I think cis, in relation to relationships and dating, I think cis folks in general should have a more open mind when navigating a relationship with a non-binary person, because my last relationship ended very badly because I wasn't masculine enough for this person, even though she understood that I don't identify as a man. And I feel like if she had had a more open mind about what that actually meant, it would have been a little bit more healthy and a little bit better. And I will also say the last thing in terms of this is I've had cis women interested in me until I come out to them. And then they're suddenly just not attracted to me anymore. Even though I'm still the same person and I'm still like gorgeous as hell, but like they think I've changed somehow because I've come out to them. Like, which is ridiculous. So I think those are the three things that I'll say about this.
With regard to work?
Yeah. Well, you can talk about all of life if you want.
So I would say just believe us when we say things. If I say like, hey, could you please come to the bathroom with me because I might need backup because somebody's gonna give me shit, like, please come. Please don't assume that I'm like exaggerating or that I don't know when something isn't safe. If I talk about, you know, I took one of these climate surveys and for UVM recently and said that certain things about, I've experienced bullying in my department, which is I think based on people's assessment of what they think my gender is, which is female. So I think I'm not actually sure why I'm being bullied, but there's been bullying. And having a conversation with my chair about this, it was really helpful when I said I've been experiencing bullying, and he was just like, oh, tell me more, rather than sort of brushing it off as some of my other colleagues had sort of said, no, we don't have a problem with that here. Yes, you do, I'm telling you that you do. I'm telling you because I'm experiencing it, please believe me. So if you're someone who wants to, not burn it all down, the other one. One we don't.
Oh, I want to burn it all down.
The one where we keep some.
Restoration? No.
Sure. The one where we like.
I'm not the English person here,
I don't
okay?
know. I'm very tired.
All right.
I told you I have a small child. I get up very early. If you want to be someone who's going to be an ally to me in this situation, I'm sorry? Dismantle. Thank you. That's the one I needed. Not the fire one, the other one.
Yes, the fire one.
Just believe me. Just believe me. Believe in us when we say things.
I would say don't assume that all non-binary, trans, or gender non-conforming or genderqueer people want to be involved in diversity initiatives. Or people with marginalized identities also, that's a big one. I recently said to a coworker, I was like, yeah, well, if you need backup on that, like, I was like, I think maybe I was hired partially because of, and before I even like finished the sentence, she was like, oh yeah, I wasn't even in the hiring team and I know that about you. And I was like, cool, that no one informed me that part of my job description was to sit on the diversity committee, to bring a louder voice, to speak up on behalf of myself and all other people with marginalized identities, period. And so just don't assume that. It's not always, maybe it's someone's like passion in every way, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just kind of their person and how they feel in their heart, but actually they like just want to like sit and look at spreadsheets all day and not talk about marginalization or discrimination. So I think that's a really big one. Like, let people be in those spaces if they want to, but don't assume it and don't make them speak on behalf of groups larger than themselves or even just their person.
My tip is ask me any question, because only in a dialogue where questions about things that you don't know about me can we actually expand on what all of this means. That's how you learn about who I am. The hardest part about my coming out process when I started this was realizing that certain members of my family, in fact my sister's reaction was, "Oh, that's great." And I said, "Well, feel free to ask me any question." And she said, "Well, we don't know what questions to ask, so you have to tell us." And I sort of thought about this and wondered, well, what does that mean? Do I have to like develop a list of ask me this and ask me this? And it doesn't work that way. I would much rather have somebody ask me any question, because there are no stupid questions. You're in a learning environment. And I hope that all of your teachers, instructors, mentors encourage you to ask questions and point out there are no stupid questions. Because your question comes from your intention. And if your intention is to make me feel crappy, I'll figure that out pretty quick. If your question is to find out more about me or you, we can have a conversation about it. And it helps. It helps you, and it helps me. And my example of how it helps me, last summer, I was with a partner, and we were in transit to a break for both of us, and stopped by to see a couple of people that she knew. And these two old gay men, they're very, very sweet people. We started getting in a conversation. They knew all about me. They knew we were partners. And then one of them turns to me and says, "So, do you still have your genitals?" And of course, most of us, many of us in the room know that, this is not a good question. And I sort of froze for a moment. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? So we had this conversation about my anatomy, and I navigated it, and it was completely from a completely innocent place that they were asking this. And I navigated it, and I gave them a true answer. But afterwards, I talked about it at length with my partner. And I learned something really important about myself, which is that I had a lot of discomfort in answering the question, and I wasn't sure how to articulate the discomfort and what to do about that discomfort. So I realized that, so here's a way that I now have to respond to that question that doesn't make me feel and doesn't leave me feeling with this, oh, what do I do with this? And still opens up the dialogue between us. And namely that I can say, you know, I really appreciate that you asked that question, because it's a divisive question in my cohort. And some people feel one way, and some people feel another way, and still others feel a completely different way. And here's how I feel about it, and here's why. So we can have a dialogue about that. We don't need to talk about what's in my pants. We just need to talk about, why does that matter? That's the point. So asking me that question gave me that opportunity to look inward and say, what do I want to be able to answer in the future? And now I've got it. So ask questions.
That's a perfect segue, because I was going to open it up for audience questions, and I promise I did not force Lola to say any of that, but it's perfect. Maddie, if you want to rip one of these mics out.
Can I take one away?
Yeah. Go if anyone has any,
Shall share the other.
yeah, the other one turns into a handheld as well, so you can just kind of pass along the line.
Movie.
If anyone has, we have tons of hands. Yes, perfect.
If you could introduce yourself and share your pronouns before you ask your question.
Hello, I'm Jada, she, her pronouns, and I want to start with, first of all, thank y'all for allowing space for this, and Nicole already asked about self-care, but I want to kind of expand on that. How do you integrate joy into your everyday lives?
I see you with that deep question.
Sounds like David has an answer.
I knew since I met you a couple days ago that you have a profound introspective mind. I really appreciate this question. I don't really have a good answer, but I will say that I try to stay grounded in. I try to stay grounded in who I am and how I engage, and not lose track of the things that are taking joy from me. So I guess I'm going the opposite direction, because it's not about like really how I'm finding joy. It's more like how can I keep it from seeping away. And one example is just reflecting on the things that I've overcome. And I read a couple poems last night at an event, and one of them was just like a list of shit that's happened to me. And the power of that, of just naming things, actually brought me a lot of joy, because I was like, oh, I went through that, I got through that. Yeah, so I don't know if that really answered your question, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
So I think it's pretty clear that I like to read. Because all of my answers are just about books. And so my answer is actually from an old dead white straight guy, which is Kurt Vonnegut said something about how his uncle always said, I encourage you to notice when you're happy and think to yourself, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. Which I think we now call mindfulness, but back in the day it was just like Uncle Alex. But I ever since I read that, it's I don't even know what book it was in. It was probably really silly. But yeah, I guess it's kind of like what David was saying. Like, the joy is there. Don't let it seep away. Also notice when it's happening. Because I think it's really easy to notice everything that's not joy that's happening. And the last couple of years in particular, just pretty much a steady stream of shit. So when you find the not shit, make sure you notice.
I kind of think of it as two types of joy. One that I kind of feel and experience and makes me laugh or smile. But the other kind that I experience is just kind of is witnessing joy and just kind of seeing that. And so my sister is trans, and we talk a lot about trans joy, and it doesn't always have to happen to us or people we know or anyone in our family, especially not in our family. But like when things happen, when you see a video of a bunch of queer people dancing, or read about an incredible trans relationship or what have you, that can feel really good and important, but definitely is a different kind of joy than kind of I think what these two are mentioning of just what makes you feel good in your heart. But I think that's also something that's important for me, and often just comes from witnessing it or being on the periphery of it.
Such great answers, such wisdom. I'm just amazed. How do I find joy? I find joy in writing, composing, playing, and singing music. It resonates with me when it's political satire, which I'm getting pretty good at. It resonates with me when I do big band swing. And let me tell you, Duke Ellington was fucking genius. So that's a really big part of it for me. I'm a swing dancer, which I love. And hopefully this isn't TMI, but I find great joy in my sex life. And it is such a tragedy such an awful tragedy. I see these stories over and over and over again of non-binary, queer, trans people. They're moving from one place to one constellation of their gender to another, and all of a sudden their sex life goes away, and it's awful. I'm a sex and relationship coach, and it's awful. So one of the things I'm also doing is I'm gradually working my way into a book about that joy and not the tragedy.
Who else? Ah, there's so many, yes.
Hello, my name is Jay. I use they, them pronouns. David kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but for people that hold multiple identities, which we all do, but people that hold very marginalized identities, multiple identities, how do you carry them with you into every space so that you're not leaving something behind and you're recognizing that everything is hurting at once?
This might be like a not answer, but this is kind of how I interpreted this. As a white person, I make sure that if I'm in queer spaces, I'm prioritizing the voices and kind of experiences of queer people of color or of queer people with disabilities or just people with multiple identities, and recognizing that I can kind of be marginalized or oppressed in one way, but that also another one of my identities holds a ton of privilege in society today. So that's one way that I'm mindful of.
I want to make sure that I understood your question because my hearing isn't great, I'm sorry. I think you're asking how might I recognize the existence, the presence of marginalized population within my own cohort, is that?
It was more so like, how do you bring all of your identities into a space at once so that you're not leaving something behind?
Including those that aren't my own.
Can be, but it was more like a personal question of like, so I'm non-binary, but I'm also Asian, I'm also queer. I'm bringing all of those identities at once. I'm not just non-binary in this space, I'm not just queer in this space. How do you bring all of those identities into one space so that you're not leaving something behind?
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, one of the things that I've been doing recently is, and this is sort of a not response, thank you. I've been intentionally trying to discard pieces of me that I don't like, because I don't want those pieces to show up. I don't want the raised as male part, the sports part. It's icky, it's uncomfortable to me. I'm frankly so exhausted by white culture, whatever the fuck that means, that I'm trying to jettison it, and you can't, but it's worn me out to the point where I don't know how to get around it. It's like living under this big rock, and I don't want to be there anymore, but rock is pretty damn big. Otherwise, I'm not at all shy about bringing all of my facets into the room at the same time. I dressed up for this occasion, which could have been worse. So, yeah, that's a really difficult question for me. I try to let all of those things show up without having other people feel extremely uncomfortable, which I've managed to do on more than a few occasions. And I also try to be aware of how other people are not letting those identities show up, whether it's mine or somebody else's.
I think this goes back to what I was saying about intersectional spaces. I can't truly show up as my full self unless I'm in a space that welcomes intersectionality. There are parts of me that I can't hide. you know, I'm brown and I wear hearing aids, and if my hair is shorter, you see them, and if it's longer, you don't. There are things about me that I can hide. My gender identity is number one. I can hide that all day. Do I know? But I could. I can hide my age. A lot of folks assume that I'm younger than I am or older than I am, depending on what space I'm in. So the way that I bring all of my identities into a space is to only put myself in spaces where I can. And that's not possible for everyone, and I want to name that I have the privilege to be able to do that and to choose that. I can come to a space like this and be my full authentic self because it's a choice that I have and it's an opportunity that I have. But I find myself saying no to things that are in locations where I know I'm not going to be able to be authentic. Saying no to things that are run by organizations that I know don't have an intersectional lens. So really being intentional about the spaces that I'm actually in, which automatically leads to what you're talking about, being able to show up in multiple ways. So that's been my approach recently. But it's tough. It's really difficult sometimes, especially when you hold multiple marginalized identities, to be authentic and feel like you can do that and feel like it's okay to do that. So yeah.
I don't have much to add here.
That's okay.
I think that I'm someone whose identities are pretty apparent most of the time. I've always looked queer since I was 3. I've always looked like I wasn't quite sure what my gender was since about 3. So in some ways, I think that for me really allowed me to develop into a person who is going to be me everywhere I go. But like David was saying, I've definitely made a lot of choices as a result of that. I was self-employed for about 7 years because I didn't feel like being part of the workforce was something that was going to work for me, and I was so privileged to have skills that I could put on the internet and sit in my home and copy edit people's manuscripts, and they didn't know anything about me, and have that work. So I don't think that answered your question, but it was related to what David said. So I'm gonna count it. Okay,
You get a half point.
I get a half point.
Congratulations.
Add one thing. One of the other things that I realize that I do is that I'm now intentionally bringing myself into situations and conversations where I myself know I will feel really uncomfortable around my privilege and around who I am. And I don't do this because I'm a masochist. That's a different topic. I do this because I think that by being that vulnerable, I want to demonstrate that vulnerability, that very vulnerability is the thing that opens myself and others up to a better shared conversation about our difference and what that means and how we can coexist. Can we sit down at the same table and agree to disagree and still have a good conversation?
So 2 more hands over here and then come up there.
Hello, my name is Alice, she, her pronouns. So I know personally as a trans person, I gain a lot of joy and satisfaction by confusing cis people with my gender, because I really like having that blank slate to kind of explain myself and showcase who I am. And I'm wondering, is there any part about being non-binary that brings you particular joy?
So as I said earlier, I really like confusing the children. I love confusing the children because they ask good questions, and I get to tell them things that no one was going to tell them, and they weren't going to find out if they didn't ask me. And they asked me because they don't know. They don't know what's going on.
something I love doing is singing songs that are sung by folks who have extremely different voices than mine, mostly women-identified individuals. When I sing them, I feel more like me, because my singing voice is substantially higher than my speaking voice. And when I sing, I feel like I'm being more authentic to who I am, while also not like faking it. Like, I feel like if I raise my voice when I'm speaking, I'm kind of like being a little fake. But when I'm singing and I'm singing in a high pitch, or I'm singing a song that's by a woman, I feel just more alive, and I feel like I'm showing up as my true self.
I think I like being in this place of being able to like be and seem really confused, but also that's kind of being the point of it all, and being able to kind of present in that way and act in that way, and like you said, just kind of confuse people, and be whatever I want to be on a given day, and kind of present however I want to present on a given day, because people might not understand my identity, but they can definitely understand or tag some kind of like confusion seems okay for that person, and that works, and that's kind of blocked in. And not saying that everyone who's non-binary or trans is confused, but I think just being able to kind of be a little bit unpredictable and make people like look twice or think twice and be like, oh God, that was a blouse yesterday and now it's a button down or whatever. And so I think that I enjoy that, and I enjoy having the space to do that, because it's freeing. It's like my identity is what it is, and so yeah.
On a similar vein, I love confusing people, and I love the looks, and I really love the dirty looks that I get, especially when I'm dressed to the hilt, and then I know you're just jealous and you want my outfit.
Hi, Sam here, they, them pronouns. I have a question more related to pronouns and actually being able to correct people who misuse your pronoun, preferably when it comes to family members, because it's been 7 years since I've used they, them. My mom can still not correctly use, she still calls me she, not totally on accident. And it's just to the point where it's like, what do I need to do to make sure that she uses my pronouns correctly, especially when she confronts other family, other friends who may not accept me for who I am because she wants to be part of my life. So any advice, anything you've experienced that kind of like has helped you with correcting people that are part of your life that may use your gender or your pronoun incorrectly?
This is totally not that like deep of an answer, but recently I found this website, and I'm maybe gonna forget the name of it, but it's by this like Australian LGBTQ youth advocacy group, and it's like mine is 18 or 19 or 8 or 9 or something like that, and they have this pronoun game. So if you look that up, and it's this incredible. Do you know about it?
I've heard of something.
So it's great. It's like this little game where you put in the pronouns that you want to like practice. And you you just go through it, and I find it really, I like to do it about myself. The sentences are really cute. It just asks you to like, blank likes chicken, and you would just put in like, they like chicken, and it walks you through this, and it's totally doesn't get at kind of the deep issue of it, but it's a great little link to send off, and just kind of lightens it a little bit. Again, not a very useful answer, but everyone should check it out. And it can be a sweet little light thing to send off to people, even though your pronoun usage doesn't have to be a light issue.
I think family members are particularly particularly difficult, challenging, because they've grown up with us in one way. I won't say I had it any more or less difficult than anybody else in the room, but I realized right away that I had a long span of time as one person. It wasn't reasonable to expect that all of a sudden like the switch would be flipped. So a couple of things would try to be gentle and try to be patient. That was my first thing. that I had to understand that it's going to take them some time. Try to be humorous about it. So occasionally I've misgendered the other person so that they can hear it, which is sort of funny because then they realize, wait, what did you, oh, and then they sort of get it. And the other thing, which is a little bit more subtle, is I began to notice the nature of gifting. Most recently, my sister sent me a really beautiful silk scarf, and the note that was enclosed spoke volumes to how she had progressed in her recognition of me as a she, which was just a wonderful feeling. So noticing those gifts were good.
I forgot what I was going to say. Hold on.
Take your time, think about it. That'll be a real good answer.
I got it. So I have 3 different approaches. One of them is super dramatic.
I love it. Continue.
I'll look around and not answer, and then when they look confused, I will say, "Who are you talking to?" Until they finally get their shit together and like do it right. That's for days when I'm feeling super sassy, which is most days. The other end of the spectrum is super subtle. I just like interject and say they. That's it. That's all I do. If they don't get it, that's on them. And then somewhere in the middle is I interject and then talk to them about it. Like, hey, you just misgendered me. Can we talk about that? And then I'll answer your question. And so finding the balance between those 3, because you can't do the dramatic all the time, and you can't do the subtle all the time because of energy and because of the relationship you may have with that person. But if you balance those 3 approaches, I find that it works really well. And also, I love being dramatic, and so whenever I can do the dramatic version, I'm like all about it. We could be standing in a room full of people, I'm just like, I don't care what people think about me. So yeah, those are my three approaches to when somebody misgenders me.
So I said earlier that I actually, pronouns aren't for me as important as maybe they are for some other people, but so as I've said, I have a child, which meant I had to pick a parental honorific, because mom and dad weren't gonna work for me. And I sort of went on the internet and said, what are the other genderqueer people doing? And a lot of them were using Baba. But I was living in Singapore where that actually means father to most of the people I knew. And I was like, well, that's both culturally appropriative and is still gender binary. So I just made up a word. And my word is Dabo. So my child calls me Dabo, as does everyone in his life. I wrote a blog post that was just like, this is what we're doing, guys. Like, you can keep using whatever pronouns you want, but I need you to use this made-up word, and I need you to use it all the time. So like, his teachers at the YMCA call me Dabo. My parents, who still don't really understand what's going on with me, they call me Dabo. Like, the other children call me, some of them call me the Dabo, because I'm the only one. There's actually, this is I'm gonna get back to your question, but it's a cute story. So there was a kid in my son's class who, his parents got divorced and he got a stepdad, and he didn't really know what to call him because he didn't want to call him by his first name, but he wasn't dad. And so he started calling him Dabo, because that's a name for a parent that you have that you don't know what to call. So for a while there were 2 of us, we were both Dabos. So where I'm going with this is that my mom's really good at remembering. My dad's not so good, sometimes he calls me mom, even though my child has a mom, that's his other parent, and it gets really confusing. So I was wondering if you had any family members, any siblings, or anybody who's really good, who can be your wing person, and when your mom messes up.
My dad can do it. Like,
Your dad can do it.
My mom tells me, she's like, yell at me when I do it, and that's just not my personality, but I'm trying to train myself to be like, just scream at her, being like, it's they, not.
But like, your dad can do that. Put your dad in charge of that.
Yeah,
like this doesn't need to be your problem. Put your dad in charge.
We're both introverts, so we're trying to figure
Okay, we'll do it for a low key guy. Your dad can get a little sign, he can just like hold it up.
I love it.
Yeah, just like have your dad do this. This is your dad's new project. Yeah, no more like woodworking or like flowering, whatever he's doing. This is his new project.
Yeah.
That's great. Do we have any other questions in the audience?
My name's Dee, they, them. In spaces that you don't feel safe when your pronoun is asked, how do you respond?
Mumbling.
I'm specifically like referring to when you were saying in your class of when you ask pronouns, like for some that is like being inclusive and providing a class that you know that you're seeing, but then others it is like a checkbox and navigating, well, is this person asking for a checkbox? Also, now that I'm disclosing this in a room of other people, is this safe? Is this an environment that is now going to create a need for education and preventing me from actually doing my work, because now I'm seen as who I am, but then that's now also this other being of who I am.
So I could say from the sort of professor standpoint that it is always optional. I would never say, like, you must tell me all of your demographic information in front of the whole class, day one. That's all I have.
Sure. Yeah, kind of going off that, looking at it from both a participatory lens and also a facilitation lens. When I facilitate a group or a session, I always share my pronouns, but I never ask. And the reason is, by sharing them, I hope to be inviting folks who feel comfortable and really want that validation to share, but I'm not going to put them on the slide, please share your pronouns. That's just my own personal approach, but I found that it is the best way not to out somebody. And some people will just forget because they're cis and they don't care, but most of the people that don't share, it's like intentional, and that's beautiful. From a participant, when I'm a participant, and somebody asks me my pronouns and I'm not safe or comfortable sharing that with the group, I just won't share them. And if somebody then subsequently misgenders me, I also let that go because I haven't shared my pronouns and I don't necessarily want to have that conversation. And so that's another tidbit of self-care for me. If I haven't shared my pronouns with someone and they misgender me, I usually just like let it go. Because they're not important enough to me for that to weigh on me if I haven't shared it with them. Like, who do you think you are? You're insignificant. But if I have shared my pronouns with you, that means you mean something to me. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Something else that kind of doesn't answer the question but gets at the topic. I was talking with one of my coworkers about pronouns and she was like, well, do you want me to just say every pronoun that I'd be okay with? And I was like, well, yes and no, like and then I just got into this whole thing of like your pronouns are yours and they're not preferred. People always say preferred pronouns, they're mandatory, they're yours, they're in your heart, they can be fluid, they can really just be whatever you want. So I think also just giving space for kind of doing like what David said, like use whatever pronouns are going to work for you at that moment, and then you can totally turn around and change your pronouns in that space if that feeling does change. You can tell someone that's overheard that but has heard your pronouns differently elsewhere. You can explain that to them, you cannot explain that to them, and so I think that's something just to make space for like you can do whatever the hell you want with your pronouns and whatever is going to feel most comfortable and safe, and it doesn't have to follow a rule book or anything, but also recognizing that that it can be a really shitty thing to be like asking to be misgendered in like a class for a whole semester or one space or whatnot, so that doesn't always kind of work.
I'm kind of torn by this. I've been working in the field of consent for 6 years very deeply and came to a place of recognizing that helping people understand how to make choices and decide what they do and do not want is a key part of that process. And in so doing, I recognize that most of the time, most of us have no idea what we want. And it's not simple to be able to turn to say, so what do you want? And expect an answer instantaneously. And I think that that's true with pronouns and with gender identification on any level, no matter what word you want to use for that. I certainly don't, in any workshops that I run, any classes that I teach, I will always give people a choice. If it's appropriate, I might say, if you have a preferred pronoun, feel free to use it. And then, like you, I think that's a really good observation. If nobody asks, if you don't give it, it's not really appropriate for you to be upset if you're misgendered. Doesn't mean you can't correct it, but it's just something to remember. That said, there's a part of me that struggles with the whole idea of how is this relevant to us as human beings? Fundamentally, we are human beings. I care about all of you in the sense that you are part of the larger picture of humanity. And hopefully many of you will go out and do great things in the world. But what you identify as isn't part of that right now. It's your quality of spirit, it's your values. So I'm really struggling with this whole balance of, is it useful information? Might it accidentally out somebody? That's a painful situation. So I try to be in a place that opens it up to choice and lets people know clearly you don't have to decide, you don't even have to participate. You can fall asleep in the corner if you want to. But if you do want to participate and you have something to say on that line, speak your piece and the rest of us will accept that.
Anyone else? I give myself a time check.
There are no stupid questions.
There are no stupid questions. I have a text from my mom. She doesn't know I'm running this event. That's why she texted me. That's okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I have a couple events to plug. Congratulations. The WGC does a bunch of events. The Women's and Gender Center. If you have not heard me say WGC yet, that's what that means. Crisscross. So Friday, we have the Coming Out Monologues, hosted by our lovely Jay. That's at 6? Yes, Friday, April 5th at 6 p.m. in CCM 221. I'm just going to go one floor down, right in the lecture hall, or at least I like to call it the lecture hall. We're going to have it all decked out. It's going to be super gay. Snacks, goodies, I'll be there. I'll give you a high five. Yeah, that's all I have on that one. The next one on my list is the Dismantling Rape Culture Conference. Do you want to talk about that one?
I forgot where the mic was.
Yes, find the microphone.
I was about to talk into this thing, like, yeah, so the Dismantling Rape Culture Conference is an annual event at UVM, at the University of Vermont, and it is being held next Thursday, April 11th. It starts at the wee early hour of 8 a.m. and ends just after 4, but you don't have to come for the entire conference. The registration link will ask you if you're only available for certain times of the day. I won't even be there at 8 a.m. And I'm on the committee. And so it's really challenge by choice, no pressure. You can come to one session, you can come to all 4. And as the name suggests, the conference is about, debunking and dismantling the systems of oppression that are feeding into rape culture as it exists, primarily on college campuses, but in general. And it's really, really powerful and educational, and it's also fun. The presentations range anywhere from conversations on toxic masculinity, to survivors sharing stories, to affinity spaces for people of color, queer people of color, trans people of color, survivors, women, identified individuals. There's a keynote that's gonna be literally so good. I'm so excited. There are flyers up there on the table, and I encourage you to take one because am really bad at explaining keynotes and people who are giving keynotes, and so I don't want to like fuck that up right now. But there's information on that on the flyer. It's going to be amazing. I am presenting, just a shameless plug, in the third session, so you should be awake by then. And if you don't have class, and if you're not otherwise engaged, we would love to see you at the conference. It is being held in the Davis Center at UVM, and so from here, that would be like a 10, 15-minute walk. But there's also obviously parking if you need to drive, and we would love to see you there. Yeah, do you have anything you want to add, or?
That was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, I have a mic. I got handheld.
I forgot.
Hands free? I don't know. It's on my shirt. Yeah, I'm going to that. If you need a buddy to go with, I'm not going to the first session. 8 a.m.'s really early, and I have an 8 a.m. class.
I've been awake for 3 hours.
You're right, I just want to say that.
Wow. I'm so proud.
I wasn't joking.
I'm so proud of you. But yeah, if you need a buddy to go with, hit me up. I love going to UVM because it makes me feel better about how Champlain is. I'm so sorry. I'll leave it at that. Oops. Yeah, that's right. I'm the only Champlain person on this panel. It's okay. You have to listen to me. I have a microphone.
Next event.
Yeah. There is. Don't look at that. Look at me. Monday, April 15th at 8:30 in the Champlain room. We actually have a comedian coming in, Cindy Pierce, and she talks about sexuality and relationships. We've had her here before. She's amazing. Please come. You can also come to a dinner with her at 6 o'clock. Nope, not 6 o'clock.
There's information on the flyers directly outside this room where there are also snacks. So.
Okay. That means Nicole Glidden doesn't actually know what time that event is.
That means I don't know.
All right. It's up there. Don't worry. And of course, we have our own Lavender graduation happening. That is the April 28th, Sunday at noon. And so that's where we celebrate our queer seniors. That's me. I'm one of them. There's flyers up there. You can learn how to sign up if you are a queer senior. You can nominate people. That's cool. Because we give out awards, and I don't know, it's a fun time. It's a party. It's a gay party, and that's all I like to go to these days. Overall, I want to thank you all for coming. I'd love to thank our lovely panelists with a round of applause. And if you all cool with sticking around for a couple minutes in case anyone has one-on-one questions, that would be great. But I bid you all a great evening. Stay safe, folks. Thank you.
I'm totally open to questions.
I don't know how to turn this off.